This week on Quadriga, Germany, new government, new direction. Almost 3 months after the federal election, Germany finally has a new government. The coalition of Conservatives and Social Democrats faces challenges at home and abroad. As Chancellor Merkel begins her third term, the Eurozone crisis remains the major obstacle to growth in the EU. Germany has been criticised for being too tough on the struggling countries of southern Europe. At the same time, Berlin needs to strengthen relations with other world powers, such as Russia and the United States. Before the election, the parties had different positions on many issues. So, will the Grand Coalition be able to agree Germany's approach to the world? Your host this week, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome. The Chancellor says a grand coalition should be able to accomplish grand tasks. So will it do so? That's what we want to talk about today with three journalists who follow European and German events closely. I'm very happy to welcome Melissa Eddy. She is Berlin correspondent for the International New York Times. She previously covered Germany and the rise of Chancellor Merkel for the Associated Press. And Laura Lucchini, she's a freelance journalist for the Argentinian newspaper La Nación and the Italian newspaper L'Inchiesta. And Tony Patterson is with us. He's the Berlin correspondent for the London Daily, The Independent. He's also worked as a foreign correspondent in Paris, Bonn, Warsaw, Vienna, and Berlin. Tony Patterson, let's start out where Chancellor Merkel herself began, namely with the topic of Europe. Her very first speech to Parliament on Wednesday concerned the European Union. Was that a signal about where she plans to go in this final term for her as Chancellor? Or was it perhaps just coincidence, given the fact that the European Union summit is scheduled this week?
Well, I think first she actually did say that energy was her main subject, actually, her main task. Europe being very much up there as well, but I don't really see from her lineup that there's going to be a massive change in German policy. I think she's kept Wolfgang Schäuble as finance minister. He's a veteran conservative finance minister who's had the job for a very long time, and the German position on Europe has been very much protecting and shoring up German interests right down the line. And I don't see that's going to change. There's been no change in European policy, and particularly the fact that Herr Schäuble is still in office shows there's no change there. And I think also, as far as the Social Democrats are concerned, that there's no real indication that they are going to have an enormous amount to say when it comes to Europe, because the posts that they've taken over are very much domestic focused.
The question is, Melissa Eddy, what real change would mean here? Chancellor Merkel herself has changed from time to time. If we think back about 4 years, she was the one who really pushed for integration in Europe. And then the last year and a half or 2 years, she's been backpedaling, looking more and more to retain the power of the national member states' governments. So where do you see her going in this term? Would you agree with Tony Patterson that we're not likely to see much of a change of direction? And what does that mean?
I think it's true that we're not likely to see a strong change of direction at the European level. The interesting thing is Merkel and Schäuble as well often will say, it's all about Europe, it's all about Europe. But when you examine their policies, they really are not so integrative as they are professing to be. And already, if you look at the banking union deal, which was the first thing that Schäuble did, it was ensuring that the member states had the final say. They talk about this being so important, moving next step towards European integration, but then in the actions, they're going in the other direction. However, I think Ukraine is very interesting. I think it was a real lesson for the Europeans that they thought they could go in and that the Ukrainians were ready to sign. Merkel had it off. She thought she would have this beautiful ceremony, and it all collapsed. Russia is out there, and I think there's going to be a real serious rethinking process going on. Steinmeier is starting out in Warsaw today, which is sending a clear signal. They're talking about Ukraine. They know they have to deal with Russia. I think that is going to prove a major challenge, and it may have to be some tinkering on the European side and where they actually want to go with Europe and what kind of signals they're sending out.
Laura Lucchini, the Chancellor's very first speech to Parliament, as I mentioned, was all about Europe. And she did say in that speech, Germany cannot be strong without Europe. Europe is Germany's homeland, its Heimat. Is that not really a signal to the public? She has long been somewhat reluctant to go out and make a really strong pro-European speech. Do you think she is sending a sign with this one?
No, because she said that many times. I mean, it's just a statement she repeats on and on. I don't see a change in the policy. And what I missed yesterday in her first speech in front of the parliament, it was a vision of what is really happening in Europe. I mean, she's talking about progress and new achievement and maybe the starting of the end of the crisis, but we don't see it in Italy. They don't see it in Spain or Greece. And she was totally not seeing what is really going on in the streets, because in France, Italy, and Greece as well, a lot of powerful anti-European and anti-Euro movement are growing. Italy has registered a week of strong and violent protests against the Eurozone. I mean, and yesterday this aspect was totally absent from the speech, and that's the thing. It's a lack of vision. Angela Merkel, I'm sure she's convinced that her recipe is the right one, like fiscal discipline is the key to gain competitivity and to come out from the crisis. But she doesn't. She lacks this vision of what is happening in those countries.
Well, the fact is, Tony Patterson, actually, she said in this speech to Parliament that the glass is very much half full. She sees recovery on the horizon. She mentioned a lot of instruments that the EU will try to use, for instance, to combat youth unemployment. Was her vision too rosy?
Well, I think it probably was. I agree. I mean, I don't think she really does have a vision when it comes down to it. It's really... Chancellor Merkel is all about managing a status quo situation and a step-by-step approach to the European crisis. At the back of this is obviously the fear of the German electorate, which has sort of controlled the whole election, this lack of vision which we saw in that very step-by-step approach. She's frightened that if this European situation gets out of hand, obviously the Germans are going to be asked to pay massively for it, and she wants to stop that at all costs, and that is number one in her mind. It's domestically driven more than anything else, more than European driven, unfortunately. Or the southern European countries are dying to see a change, a more generous approach from the Germans, but it's not going to happen, not with this lineup.
Melissa Eddy, you've been reporting on Germany for many years now. Is it really so incomprehensible that she's paying attention to the interests of the taxpayers in Germany?
I don't think so. I think she realizes, first of all, she has sort of no choice. She had to deal with the crisis, the European crisis, the Eurozone in her last term. So there were things like this energy issue where she actually does have a vision. There are clear numbers, 80%, 2050, reductions. That you can see where the Merkelian vision, if you will, there, what it looks like. And I agree, that's what she's lacking for Europe. We don't see, when you talk about youth unemployment, it's very vague. It's sort of just, what do you say, floxen. It's little sayings and words, but you don't have the concrete sort of numbers. But she was forced to abandon a lot of these issues that were important domestically to deal with the Euro crisis and keep it from spiraling completely out of control. So now she's returning and having to focus inward. I think also the SPD has driven that somewhat. And she must be watching very closely this membership vote that they had, that everybody initially thought was the craziest thing ever. But what happened is
Let's
it
just remind our viewers,
troops.
because they don't all follow the news as closely as we do. The SPD grassroots membership voted on whether to accept the coalition treaty and gave it a resounding yes.
Gave it a resounding yes, but not only that, it circled their wagons. The party emerged stronger and more cohesive. And she must have been watching that. And a strong SPD is not necessarily at the moment completely in her interest.
Laura Lucchini, could a strong SPD push for real changes on things like austerity? Many people thought that might be their role in this coalition. We didn't see too many signs of it yesterday, but do you think that might be ahead? Might we see that coming out of the SPD, which certainly is more Keynesian than Mrs. Merkel?
I don't see it at all. I mean, I think those people expecting from SPD to defend another kind of policy in Europe were abroad, not in Germany. I mean, in Germany, I think the people are quite comfortable with the situation right now, and I don't see the reason to change it. I don't see like Social Democrats defending a change of policy in Europe. I don't see that, and they signed a contract in which the European policy of Angela Merkel was transcribed word for word. They after campaigning for some kind of form of mutualization of the debt, of joint debt liability, they totally forget it, and they said no in the contract. I don't see this push. I don't see this pressure from the SPD.
It almost seems as though their social agenda, which during the campaign was somewhat focused on Europe, the SPD, now has become completely focused on the electorate. It's become domestically focused with the minimum wage, with the reforms to pension that have been proposed. They're all classic SPD approaches, but Europe is not necessarily the beneficiary of them. The German taxpayer is.
They also had to, because it was probably a condition of Merkel. You can get that, but you give me like a free hands on Europe. And then they said maybe at the end of the day, for our electorate, it's better to reach the minimum wage than to fight for joint debt in Europe, of course, which is not a popular topic.
I want to come back to what minimum wage and pension changes might mean for Europe as well as for Germany. But staying briefly with the question of EU policy, Tony Patterson, it's really in the hands of the finance minister, isn't it? And he, of course, hasn't changed. It remains Wolfgang Schäuble from the CDU.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely the case. It's sort of what Angela Merkel has done is actually shored up her own position. And with Schäuble still there's been no indication at all that there's going to be any softening of any line as far as countries like Greece, Spain, Italy are concerned. They don't want that.
What about banking union? It was briefly mentioned by Melissa Eddy. It's something people have been waiting months for the German government to finally get down to business so that we could move on with banking union. It looks like the final agreements will be signed this week on banking union. What's it going to look like?
It looks like it. I mean, I can only go on what's being said this morning. It's only come out from what's been happening last night, but it looks very much like it's going to happen, which is a good thing. But whether this actually will mean something in terms of the basic European problem, which is poor countries not being able to meet their debts, and whether this is going to alter policy as far as that's concerned, I don't think so. It's going to soften the blow, but it's not going to attack the problem at its roots.
And it turned out as well, just that in terms of sharing any kind of the burden, ultimately the agreement that was taking shape last night really appeared that countries would still be responsible for their own failed banks through a somewhat complicated system, and they could then go and touch money that is in the mutual fund for the Europeans, but it had to go through the countries again. So it seemed to be this wide, sort of an upended pyramid where it appears European, but when it comes really down to the nuts and bolts, it may not be as mutually shared in terms of the burden as it had been sold to the public.
That, of course, goes back to that question of German taxpayers and what they might wind up being liable for if things move too fast in the vision of Chancellor Merkel. Now, she did say in her speech to Parliament something she said before, but she emphasized it very strongly this time. She believes that the European Commission must have binding oversight over member countries' national fiscal policies, their debt situation, their budgetary policies, and so on. She made a very clear statement on that point, Lara Lucchini, and she even said she would be willing to see the EU treaties changed to go in this direction. That actually is something of a change for Germany. What does it mean, and would Germany itself be willing to take medicine that Brussels prescribes?
I'm not sure. They don't see they could need this medicine, right now, and so they're pushing for it. And it's always bounded to this strong statement of Merkel that the conditionality, the union can be marked by solidarity only if we have a conditionality. And that statement, the changing of the treatment and the new powers to the Commission go in that direction. She wants the European country to have like fixed objectives to respect, and in order to have solidarity, which means money in case of need. But what I really miss in Germany, it's a clear explanation of the crisis. I was invited to a debate in Baden-Württemberg, and suddenly all the people in this debate were convinced that Italy was receiving money from Germany, which is not happening, and Germany doesn't make anything to explain that it's not happening right now. It could happen in the future, but it's not happening right now. And I think the government should explain the crisis better than they are doing right now.
Tony Patterson, something struck me in this speech that I found slightly amusing irony. In one sentence, the Chancellor told us, EU needs to have this binding, the Commission needs to have this binding oversight on member states' economic policy. A few sentences later, she started talking about new proceedings in Brussels against Germany on its energy policy, and mentioned the fact that Germany absolutely would resist this and does not agree with the line that Brussels is taking, namely that subsidies for large companies facing higher electricity prices might be a barrier to competition. So on the one hand, she's saying, yes, the Commission needs to be able to tell member states what to do. And on the other hand, she says, but we're not going to listen.
Well, that's the point. I mean, it's a question of control. I think on the energy thing, industry people were saying yesterday that if the EU gets through with this, it's going to cost an awful lot of jobs, going to put a lot of people out of work. I think that it's talk, but when it actually comes down to control, and Germans being controlled and told what to do, then barriers go up. We see this particularly in Germany in the car industry. Whenever people try to enforce controls and stop the Germans building gas-guzzling four-wheel drive cars, that the Germans complain and say, no, we can't have it. In fact, they fix it. So this legislation doesn't come through at a European level and is not binding. So I think it's fine talk, but when it comes down to it, in Europe, people are out for their own interests.
Melissa, Eddy, one of the medicines that Brussels prescribed recently to the Germans was that they actually need to spend more money. They complained about Germany's surpluses and said Germany is way too mercantilistic, way too focused on exports, needs to do a lot more expansion at home. Now I'd like to come to this question of the minimum wage and the expansion of the pension system here in Germany. Both of them big SPD topics, both of them in the coalition agreement. Could that be exactly what Brussels is looking for? Could that actually wind up putting more money in circulation here in Germany and perhaps going some way to reducing that discrepancy?
It could if it works out correctly, but I have to say, after my experience here has been, when there's a crisis, the Germans save, the Americans spend. It's from this U.S. point of view, the two are completely opposite. I think the minimum wage certainly could help out, because a lot of the people who have these lower paying jobs are younger people who, if they have the money, are more likely to spend. With the pensions, I kind of view it more as creating their own safety net, the government, because it means that if the pensions are a bit stronger, then they're not going to have to worry about older people being poor, and then they're not going to have to jump into there and to save them. But I'm not. It's going in the right direction, but I'm still not convinced that it's really what needs to be done.
Laura Lucchini, what do you think? Is it a dose of much-needed Keynesianism here in Germany, or could it wind up undermining Germany's competitiveness? After all, it was changes to the pension system that helped make Germany such an economic juggernaut in the past 5 years.
Yeah, Germany doesn't like at all to listen to these complaints about the exportation surplus and the need for the people to spend more money. They really take it personally, like what do you want that like a second league team or football team would play in the same league of why should we be weaker? So they really don't understand this critique. And Angela Merkel yesterday in front of the parliament also kind of said that we're not going. Nobody can tell we're a threat to the competitivity in Europe as long as there's also just one country which is paying the electric power less than us. So she's always pointing to the stomach of the CDU electorate on this issue, and I don't like to hear that. I don't see a change. They will willing to change in this direction just because the European Union says that.
Tony Patterson, many people in the private sector in Germany are convinced that these SPD-led changes, like minimum wage, like the expansion of the pension system, will undermine competitiveness, will cost the country jobs, and that in 4 years the German economy will be looking a great deal less strong than it does now. What do you think?
I'd be surprised if that was the case. I think that the minimum wage is an interesting point because Germany is one of the few countries in Europe which doesn't have a minimum wage, and it's introduced one finally, and I think long overdue. I think most people in Germany would agree with that. As for the pension reforms, well, 63 is going backwards if you look at other European countries which are knocking it up to 67, so that may be an issue.
Only applies to a very limited number of people, though, as I understand it. People have been in the workforce already for 45 years at the age of 63, paying in, so perhaps limited in its scope.
It has the advantage that it creates spaces, jobs for young people, because with this aging population, you run otherwise the risk as well that if you have too many old people sitting on jobs forever, then where are the young people going to get work?
But I think the other factor that we've got to look at here is that booming Germany is attracting an awful lot of labour from southern Europe at the moment, massively. And this is what these people are getting paid is in many cases way below the minimum wage. So introducing this is a positive thing, a good social act for Europe, basically, because there are so many people from Europe coming to Germany at the moment. I'd be surprised if the German economy sort of nosedived as a result of that. And I think personally that these things are overdue.
The same voices believe the German economy could very well nosedive because of another area of policy, namely the energy transformation that's going on here. Melissa Eddy, that's Germany trying to wean itself off of nuclear power and fossil fuels, promote renewables, and basically move toward a green energy system. A very breathtaking project with a lot of faults. Do you think that her government, the new government, will manage to get this thing under control? The new super minister is Sigmar Gabriel, the head of the SPD, looking very strong at the moment. Will he manage it, and where will he go?
Where he will go, that I'm not sure, but I think they will manage it because they have to manage it. The whole world is watching Germany on this one. And everyone really believes if Germany can get this right, it sets a new standard. I don't know if this government will be enough to fix all of it, and there are tremendous, tremendous problems. They also have to deal with trying to balance the costs coming through with the jobs that are being created. It's really an enormous challenge. The stakes are incredibly high. It could also very much strengthen Sigmar Gabriel, though, if he gets it right, because then he's looking to have been able, if he can say in 4 years' time, I stopped the rising energy prices, or perhaps even for the average consumer brought them down, then he's in a very, very strong position to be taking over even as an SPD chancellor at some point. So I think for him the stakes are high. For Merkel the stakes are also incredibly high because she has made this the signature mark of her government, of her past government, of this one. It's sort of, this is her legacy, and I think she must already be looking towards building that. How is she going to do that? I think that's what we're really going to be following closely. Personally, I think it's exciting. I think it's really very, very interesting, this idea of focus. And if anyone can pull it off, I think it's the Germans.
I agree. I think probably only the Germans can pull it off. But I think we have to go back to the starting point here, that it was perhaps misconceived. It was a knee-jerk reaction to Fukushima. And too quickly imposed, if you like. And I think Sigmar Gabriel may have been given a bit of a poisoned chalice, because I think it's highly unlikely that energy costs to the consumer are going to go down in the foreseeable future as a result of this. I think most estimates suggest that they're going to go up, not in the very long term. In the very long term, they probably will go down. But this is the danger that Gabriel is facing, that at the end of his tenure, he may have done it, but costs are going to be much higher for everybody all round. And it's been badly planned. It was too hastily introduced. And this, I think, is one of the big problems that stands behind this whole energy thing.
Laura Lucchini, the head of the Green Party asked rhetorically this week whether Sigmar Gabriel will really drive sustainability forward, or whether he will wind up being the king of coal.
Yes, of course. I mean, the SPD is not an ecological party. They were forced to be because of the alliance with the Greens, but they're not. They never defend so strongly ecological issues. So it's quite a risky position for Gabriel to pass through. That is dealing pro-ambient in his position. It's a risky. I think Merkel was happy to get rid of this minister with an SPD person, because it's a really risky position. And after 3 governments of a conservative chancellor, it's likely we're likely to get a social democrat chancellor, and that should be Sigmar Gabriel if he does the job very well. But the thing is, it could be exactly the minister that makes problem to him.
I'd like to move on now to foreign and security policy, recognizing that we're just leaping very briefly onto these very, very important topics. But let us briefly, at least, talk about the policy in regard to NATO, to NSA spying, because that has shaken up Germans very, very greatly. Revelations that the NSA had been tapping even Chancellor Merkel's cell phone have deeply shaken transatlantic relations. Will this government be able to repair that? That's a question that many people here have been asking.
The NSA surveillance scandal has strained Germany's links with the United States. Repairing the relationship with Washington will be one of the tasks for Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier. When he held the same job in Angela Merkel's first government, he tended to take a pragmatic line towards Russia. But the Chancellor herself has often been more wary of President Putin and his authoritarian rule. Defence Minister Ursula von der Leyen had the task of continuing the modernisation of Germany's armed forces. As troops return home from Afghanistan, some believe that Germany should be ready to respond more actively to international crises. So is the new government willing to match Germany's economic weight with a greater role on the world stage?
Let's start out with relations with the U.S. Melissa Eddy, what do you think? Can Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who of course is an old hand, he has been foreign minister previously under the last Grand Coalition, will he be able to do it?
I view it actually more as less of Steinmeier, and it's more the Interior Ministry, where Thomas de Maizière has moved back in, very close to Merkel, and she has appointed someone in the Chancellery to deal specifically with the whole secret security issues. We see in Washington, the NSA has been moved, the portfolio has now been moved to the White House. So I think both of these issues, Merkel is going to be dealing with it from Berlin, Obama will be dealing with it from the USA. I think the biggest problem here is a completely divergent view between the two sides of what security is for. For the United States, all this spying, it's about preventing another September 11. And that is still fresh enough, and it still carries enough weight that the Americans have so far, the American public have so far been perfectly willing to sacrifice some personal freedoms in order for this alleged guarantee of security. The Germans view that completely differently. It's an enormous challenge. I don't know how they will resolve this. I honestly don't know.
Tony Patterson, several German delegations have gone to the U.S., both diplomatic delegations and members of parliamentary committees who have met with their counterparts in the U.S. Senate and Congress. And yet, we're hearing that the likelihood of a comprehensive no-spy agreement between Germany and the U.S. is not great, and there is a lot of stalling going on. Why?
Well, that doesn't surprise me in the least, actually, because I think the whole nature of spying is that you don't tell the other side what you're doing. I think everybody spies on everybody else all the time, and that's the reality of the situation. And I think that in Germany it's come as a terrible shock.
But this has had tremendous political costs.
Well, it has and it hasn't. I mean, if you look at actually opinion polls that have been conducted in this country, does this issue really worry people in Germany? And there's not very many people that really are worried about it. What you've got is a group of the Greens, and perhaps the Green Party is particularly worried about it, yes, and some in the SPD. They regard it, because of Germany's background, Gestapo, Stasi, etc., the history of Germany is against spying because it's had very bad experiences with it. But as Melissa was saying, the West, America views it very much as an interest of national security, Britain as well. I think that a lot of it is a storm in a teacup, and it will eventually be calmed down and sorted out. A lot of it is very much manufactured. And I think that spying is a thing that goes on. Everybody knows that everybody is spying on everybody else.
Yeah, I disagree because they tried already to silence the issue in June when it came out the first time. And then they silenced it. They managed to maintain it silent until after the election, but then it came out again with a new revelation. And then now things are really happening in the United States after the district court said that the NSA actions are going against the Constitution. And in Germany, I don't see, of course, if you ask in the polls with the broad public, you may not notice a strong reaction, but there was quite a reaction compared to other countries in Germany. I mean, the topic has been spoken. There have been protests in the street. I don't see they could be able to silence again this issue. And one reason is that there are still many documents of the NSA that could be brought up in a third moment. And so the attention will stay high on these topics. I think they have to deal, but I don't see they have the same. There will be an agreement.
I can't see it leading to people stopping spying.
No, of course. Then let's talk about another source of tension, not only but also in the transatlantic relationship. And Melissa, Eddie, that's the sense that people have in some other countries, that Germany consistently punches under its weight when it comes to security policy in particular. And I'm thinking about Germany deciding on various occasions to opt out of the action in Libya, for example, showing a whole lot of skepticism on Syria, and so on. Do you think we're going to see a change in that area? We are getting one of the CDU's very strongest politicians heading up the defense ministry, a woman. Quite an interesting change there. Will it make a difference?
I think it will make a difference. The question is, what exactly difference will we see? One thing I find very fascinating is I know that von der Leyen lived in the States. She spent time there, and she's very sort of pro-American, if you will, in that sense. But this Germany underpunching is, again, part of the problem going back to the NSA, because with this Five Eyes agreement, where you have the United States and 4 other partners who are cooperating.
All Anglo-Saxon countries.
All Anglo-Saxon countries, but also where they say the Germans can't be part of that because the Germans are not up to scale. Again, they're under punching. At some point, Germany has to emerge from this idea that it's a protectorate, and perhaps if there's something positive to come out of this break with the NSA agreement, it's that the Germans realize maybe that the United States is not just there with a guiding hand over them, but that they have moved up to a level of equality, and they're going to have to decide, how do we deal with Washington as a more equal partner on a more equal basis? And certainly a strong signal would be to step up to the plate on certain issues in NATO and provide more funding for deployments abroad, and be more willing to go in and take part in these campaigns these military campaigns with NATO as a true partner and not as a, well, you send your troops and we'll provide a plane.
Tony Patterson, are you expecting changes in that direction, and could it make a difference that the SPD is the junior coalition partner?
I think that, as far as this is concerned, I think it's a sort of bi-party thing. I think the whole security policy in Germany is very much based on what the public is prepared to accept. And what's happened, successive administrations in Germany have gradually increased the threshold and put more and more people, taking part in the Kosovo thing, putting troops into Afghanistan. It's all been a gradual progression towards more deployment, and I don't see any big changes in that. I think it will just carry on being more and more and more, but there won't be a sudden explosion of activity. It'll be gradual.
What about EU foreign and security policy? Laura Lucchini, the summit this week will be addressing that issue as well. Apparently, Germany took the teeth out of an agreement on a security presence from Europe, removing deadlines, softening commitments. What does that tell us?
Yeah, but then if you read the coalition agreement, they say quite clearly that they would like to move in a direction of more integration of security policy in Europe. Of course, they have to soften the things because, for example, this agreement or a draft of the agreement that has been discussed should be discussed today in Brussels contains explicit dates about when the European countries should get drones, should build drones for themselves, and this is a topic that the public in Germany would not like so much. So they have to soften the things. But I think the decision to appoint Ursula von der Leyen to the defense was also in order to make the people digest the defense policy in Europe, because she's really loved and she's a mother of 7, and so they cannot imagine that she's a war defense minister. Also, the sign that this first European meeting after the new government will deal about security issues. They ask in the agreement to have every year state like a leader of state summit dealing about security issues. Goes in this direction. There are many different positions in Europe. Like France really would like to see a strong coordination of the European defense policy, but Great Britain is totally against that and will try to stop it. So I think it's a really slow process, but we're seeing it happening.
A final brief word, Laura, if you would, because your country, Italy, is on the front lines on this one. Another area of foreign policy where the EU has failed to move forward in any decisive way, refugees. Yeah. The SPD is known as the party of compassion. Do you think we're likely to see changes on refugee policy here in Germany, another area where it tends to punch below its weight?
It was explicitly directed in this coalition agreement. There are some aspects that will be improved, although I think they are quite make-up changings. The refugees will have the right to work before they had to wait for 9 months, and now they will be 3 months. They will have the right to move toward Germany, while now they have to stay in the region that is assigned to them. They will have the right to, after a long stay in Germany, they will have the right to stay just by proving that they can live with their money. But this coalition agreement doesn't talk about the important issue, which was the Dublin regulation, which is the need of refugees to be in the country to ask for asylum. They don't deal with this issue, and it's what a country like Italy are asking, because of course we are periphery of Europe, and of course refugees get to the soil in Spain and Italy and Greece.
Okay, I'm afraid we're not going to be able to go into any more depth on the refugee question. I'm sure we'll have programs on that in future. But before we end our program, I would like to ask all of you how long you think this government is going to last. It is a grand coalition between two parties that have tended to be rivals. As we mentioned, Sigmar Gabriel, the head of the SPD, looking very strong indeed. It's Angela Merkel's chance to write her entry in the history books. It is her last term, she says. Melissa Eddy, how much time do you think she'll have to do it?
I give her the full term. I think they have hammered out things far enough. I think the SPD needs that time if they're going to build up their profile. And at the end of the day, Germans like consensus. And what more consensus can you get than a grand coalition?
Tony Patterson, what do you think?
Yeah. I think it will be the full term by the look of it, given the mandate given to the SPD by their own members, that they're in a strong position. They can say, we've got this backing, we can stay there. But it's really what happens after that. It's whether the SPD breaks with the taboo that's governed German politics since reunification and decides to start cozying up and having alliances with the Linke, the left party. That will change the status quo in Germany.
Remind our viewers of what the left party's origins are and the reason there's some ambivalence here.
Well, the left party are the successors to the East German Communist Party, which is basically a dyed-in-the-wool, full-blown communist party, and the Social Democrats, which hail from West Germany, opposed to entering any alliance at national level with them because of they're tainted by their communist past, by the Stasi, etc., etc., etc. So there's been a blockage on that. But eventually, the SPD have indicated this will be softened up, and they may form an alliance with them. Then you're going to have a Germany with very clear lines, on a left and a right. Probably a bigger CDU and possibly a CDU government with the Greens at national level.
Laura Lucchini, what's your vote? Full term, or could we see a flip in the middle?
Yeah, I totally see full term, but during the negotiation there was quite a nice relationship between the two main parties. I don't see it lasting for a long time. I think they will fight a lot during this term.
Where do you see the main areas of tension?
Of course, starting from the minimum wage. Because the CDU wanted limits on that, and the SPD wanted universal. And so it will be the negotiation on the limits on this issue. And it will be like a broad discussion in the German society as well.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us for this outlook on Germany's new government and the direction it might be taking the country. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. See you soon.